some women like to weaponize that God says to love your wife like Christ loved the church. That love, God speaks to the man so he can begin to impart that into his wife. And one thing that we know that women always say is Christ died for the church. Christ sacrificed for the church. Christ, did all of these things for the church. And that is 100% right. But let's bring balance to this. Christ also loved the church to the point where he gave us our own choice. He didn't make us robots. He don't make us do anything. Christ also loved the church, which is us, where he allows us to have to deal with the consequences of our decisions sometimes. And I say that because you have some women who would talk to a man any kind of way, treat a man any kind of way, detach herself from a man, push a man away. If we looked at that based off how the church does Christ, because the same way that a woman does that to the man, the church does that to Christ. The church pushes Christ away. The church doesn't always agree with the decisions Christ is calling us to uphold. And when that happens, Christ loves us so much that he allows us to deal with the consequences of our choices because it turns us back to him. Now let's add that to a relationship between a husband and a wife. There are times that a wife has to deal with the consequences of her decisions. She has to deal with the consequences of how she speaks to that man, of how she emasculated that man. That doesn't take the love of that man away. That doesn't take the support of that man away. That doesn't take the provision or the infrastructure of that man away. It is that man's responsibility, just as Christ does, that when he allows the church, which is us, to deal with our consequences of the choices that we've made, Christ is still there with his arms wide open. He is still there accepting us back. He is still there with empathy and compassion. And so the point of this message is for the women who weaponize that a man should love his wife like Christ loved the church. Please understand that that love also looks like allowing you to deal with the consequences, because that's what Christ does. So when you talk about that a man should love his wife like Christ loved the church, please help yourself by not just reflecting on the ways that Christ sacrificed and died for the church. Also keep in mind the consequences that Christ allows us to experience because of our own decisions, our own thoughts, and the ways that we handle things, because he loves us enough to allow us to get it wrong so he can show us how to get it right.